Hello everyone, and welcome back to Snowbound Screams. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of America's national parks, places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these mountains, forests, and deserts are accounts drawn from witness reports, Park Service files, and archived broadcasts, each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. These are the experiences of those who protect our wild spaces, the rangers who patrol the boundaries between civilization and wilderness. Sometimes, they encounter things that defy explanation. The national park system spans over 84 million acres across the United States, protecting some of the most remote and untouched landscapes in North America. Within these vast territories, park rangers serve as guardians, educators, and first responders. They are trained to handle wildlife encounters, search and rescue operations, and medical emergencies. But nothing in their training prepares them for the encounters that cannot be categorized. The cases we will explore tonight span multiple decades, different parks, and varying circumstances. Yet they share common threads of the unexplained. These are not campfire tales designed to frighten. These are documented incidents that have left experienced outdoorsmen questioning what they thought they knew about the wilderness they call their office. The files we've accessed through Freedom of Information requests, personal interviews, and archived reports paint a picture of something lurking just beyond our understanding. In the darkness of our national parks, there are phenomena that science cannot yet explain. Now, let us begin. With our first story, it was early September of 2004 in Yellowstone National Park. The autumn colors had just begun to touch the edges of the vast wilderness, creating a spectacular contrast against the evergreen pines. Ranger Mark Hansen had been with the National Park Service for 7 years. His quiet demeanor and extensive knowledge of the backcountry making him one of the most respected members of the Yellowstone team. At 42 years old, Hansen was in peak physical condition, capable of covering miles of rugged terrain without difficulty. His assignment that day was routine: patrol the remote trails around the Lamar Valley, check on trail conditions, and document any wildlife activity for the seasonal report. The morning began like any other autumn day in the high country. Hansen checked out from the ranger station at Tower Roosevelt at 7:30 a.m., signing the logbook with his characteristic, neat handwriting. He carried standard equipment: a GPS unit, satellite phone, first aid kit, bear spray, and enough supplies for an overnight stay should circumstances require it. The weather report indicated clear skies, with temperatures dropping to the low 40s after sunset, typical for early September in Yellowstone. Hansen's route would take him through the Slough Creek area, then along the Lamar River Trail to the park's northern boundary, approximately 20 miles round trip. He was expected to return by late afternoon or early evening at the latest. His supervisor, Ranger David Chen, noted in the daily briefing that Hansen seemed in good spirits, mentioning he hoped to photograph the elk herd that typically gathered near the river bend during their annual rut. The radio in Hansen's vehicle crackled with routine chatter as other rangers reported their positions and activities. Everything appeared normal. The first indication that something was amiss came at 6:47 p.m. when Hansen failed to check in at the designated time. Protocol required all rangers to make contact by radio or phone every 4 hours during backcountry patrols. Chen attempted to raise Hansen on the radio, receiving only static in response. 3 more attempts over the next hour produced the same result. At 8:15 p.m., Chen tried Hansen's satellite phone, which went directly to voicemail. By 9:30 p.m., with darkness having completely fallen across the Lamar Valley, Chen initiated a preliminary search, contacting the nearest rangers to begin checking trailheads and parking areas. Hansen's government-issued Ford Ranger was found at the Slough Creek trailhead. exactly where he would have parked to begin his patrol. The vehicle was locked, and a quick inspection showed no signs of forced entry or struggle. Hansen's backpack and camera equipment were missing, suggesting he had begun his planned hike. Chen immediately called for a full search and rescue team, noting in his official report, "Ranger Hansen is an experienced outdoorsman with excellent survival skills. The fact that he has missed multiple check-ins suggests either a serious injury or an extraordinary circumstance." The search would commence at first light, but the growing unease among the ranger staff was palpable. Nothing in their experience suggested Hansen would simply wander off or fail to follow protocol. The search began at dawn the following day, with 12 rangers and volunteers fanning out along Hansen's intended route. The weather had remained clear, with no precipitation to wash away tracks or evidence. By mid-morning, searchers had located clear boot prints matching the size and pattern of Hansen's issued footwear, confirming he had indeed started along the Lamar River Trail. The tracks followed the expected path for approximately 3 miles before veering toward the riverbank in an unusual deviation from the established trail. Search coordinator Maria Rodriguez noted this discrepancy in her logbook. Hansen was too experienced to leave the trail without reason. Either he was pursuing something or being pursued. The tracks continued along the river for another half-mile before disappearing entirely at a sandy beach area approximately 50 yards wide. Despite extensive grid searching, no further tracks could be found exiting the beach area. It was as if Hansen had simply vanished into thin air. By 2 p.m., the search had expanded to include K-9 units and a helicopter for aerial reconnaissance. The pilot reported nothing unusual, no disturbed vegetation, no signs of struggle, no wildlife concentrations that might suggest a predator encounter. The only anomaly discovered was a single photograph lying face up near the center of the sandy area where the tracks ended. The image showed the elk herd Hansen had hoped to photograph. But the photo was partially obscured by what appeared to be a distortion, as if something had moved between Hansen and his subject at the exact moment the shutter clicked. Park Service photographers later examined the image and could not identify any technical malfunction that would explain the anomaly. The search continued until darkness fell, with growing concern among the experienced searchers. The second day of searching brought more questions than answers. Additional rangers from Grand Teton National Park had joined the effort, expanding the search perimeter to include areas beyond Hansen's intended route. Forensic specialists arrived to examine the beach area where the tracks had ended, using ground-penetrating radar and metal detectors. They found nothing beneath the surface except typical river sediment and stones. Meanwhile, Hansen's satellite phone records showed no outgoing calls or messages after 7 a.m. on the day of his disappearance. The GPS unit in his vehicle had been functioning properly, and his last known position was logged automatically at the trailhead at 8:15 a.m. The most disturbing discovery came mid-afternoon when a searcher found a second photograph approximately 100 yards downstream from the beach area. This image showed the riverbank from an unusual angle, as if the camera had been dropped or placed on the ground. In the distance, barely visible at the edge of the frame, was a tall, slender figure standing at the tree line. The figure was too distant to identify clearly, but its proportions appeared human, though unusually tall and thin. Ranger Chen, upon examining the photograph, made an unusual notation in the incident report. The figure appears to be watching the photographer's position. Its stance suggests awareness of being observed. The search continued through a third day, with similar results, no further evidence, no additional tracks, and no sign of Ranger Hansen. The official search was scaled back after 7 days, though park rangers continued to keep watch for any sign of their missing colleague. The aftermath of Hansen's disappearance left the Yellowstone Ranger community deeply unsettled. Officially, the case remained open with no conclusive evidence pointing to any specific cause of death or disappearance. The National Park Service conducted an internal review, finding no procedural errors or negligence in Hanson's actions that day. Unofficially, rangers who had participated in the search spoke in hushed tones about the inexplicable nature of the case. Several reported unusual feelings of being watched while searching the area where Hanson's tracks ended. Others mentioned equipment malfunctions that couldn't be explained, GPS units failing, radio communications breaking down at specific locations along the river. The 2 photographs found during the search were entered into evidence, with the second image particularly scrutinized by investigators. Enhancement techniques revealed little additional detail about the distant figure, though one analyst noted that the object appeared to be unnaturally still, as if it were unaffected by the slight breeze that was moving the trees and vegetation around it. 5 years after Hanson's disappearance, the case remains one of Yellowstone's most baffling mysteries. Ranger Chen, now retired, occasionally returns to the Lamar Valley each September, searching for answers that never come. The sandy beach where Hanson's tracks ended has become something of a pilgrimage site for rangers who knew him. A quiet reminder that sometimes the wilderness takes more than it gives. No trace of Mark Hanson was ever found beyond those photographs and the mysterious tracks that led to nowhere. It was late May of 2011 in Mesa Verde National Park, Colorado. The spring season brought moderate temperatures and occasional afternoon thunderstorms to the high desert landscape. Ranger Sarah Mitchell had transferred to Mesa Verde just 3 months earlier. Drawn by the opportunity to work among the ancient cliff dwellings and archaeological sites that dotted the park's rugged terrain. At 29 years old, Mitchell represented a new generation of park rangers, college-educated, technologically savvy, and deeply passionate about preserving America's cultural heritage. Her assignment on May 27th was routine. Conduct the final security check of the Cliff Palace Loop before the park closed for the evening. This task involved ensuring all visitors had exited the area, securing access points, and documenting any potential conservation concerns. The evening began unremarkably, as Mitchell drove the winding road to the Cliff Palace parking area, arriving at 6:15 p.m. The last tour group had departed 30 minutes earlier, leaving the ancient structures bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Mitchell signed the security log at the trailhead, noting the clear weather and lack of any visitor vehicles in the parking area. As she began her descent along the paved trail toward the cliff dwellings, she radioed dispatch to confirm her position and intended route. Everything appeared normal for a routine evening patrol. The first anomaly occurred as Mitchell approached the main viewing platform overlooking Cliff Palace. The air, which should have been filled with the sounds of evening birds and the gentle breeze moving through the canyon, was unnaturally still. Even more unusual was a faint whispering sound that seemed to emanate from the dwellings themselves. Mitchell paused, straining to identify the source of the sound. It resembled human speech, though too distant to distinguish individual words or voices. She noted the phenomenon in her field notebook, writing, 6:42 p.m., unidentified auditory phenomenon near Cliff Palace. Sounds like distant conversation, but no visitors present. She initially attributed the sound to acoustic anomalies in the canyon, something she had read about in the park's orientation materials. As she continued her security check, however, the sound seemed to follow her movement along the trail. When she stopped at the Sun Temple overlook, the whispering became clearer, resolving into what sounded like multiple voices speaking in an unfamiliar language. Mitchell, who had minored in linguistics in college, did not recognize the speech patterns as belonging to any known indigenous language of the region. The quality of the sound was unusual as well, not like voices carrying across distance, but as if the source was very close, yet somehow muffled or filtered through an unusual medium. Despite her scientific training and rational mindset, Mitchell felt an uncharacteristic chill as she continued her patrol. By 7:15 p.m., Mitchell had completed her inspection of the main cliff dwellings and was preparing to return to the parking area. The whispering sounds had gradually faded as she moved away from the central structures, which she found somewhat reassuring. As she passed the kiva near the trail junction, however, she experienced something that defied logical explanation. The kiva, a ceremonial chamber used by the ancestral Pueblo people, was typically accessed only by authorized personnel. Mitchell noticed that the protective gate, which should have been locked, stood slightly ajar. This immediately raised concern, as it suggested either a security breach or potential vandalism. Mitchell approached cautiously, calling out to identify herself as a park ranger. There was no response, except for the return of the whispering sounds, now louder and more distinct than before. She radioed dispatch to report the situation, noting the time as 7:23 p.m. As she awaited instructions, the whispering resolved into what sounded like a single voice speaking in English, though with an unusual cadence and accent. The voice seemed to be coming from within the kiva itself, saying words that Mitchell could not quite make out clearly. What was most disturbing was that the voice appeared to be responding to her radio transmission, though not in a way that made logical sense. Park service regulations required Mitchell to investigate any potential security breach. So with some trepidation, she approached the kiva entrance and peered inside. The interior of the kiva appeared undisturbed, with no signs of vandalism or unauthorized entry. Mitchell's flashlight beam revealed the familiar features of the ceremonial chamber, of the stone bench encircling the space, the central fire pit, and the small opening in the floor that symbolized the sipapu, the portal through which ancestral beings emerged. What was not supposed to be there, however, was a faint blue light emanating from the center of the fire pit. Mitchell had never seen anything like it in her 3 months at Mesa Verde, nor had she read about any such phenomenon in the extensive park documentation she had studied. The whispering voice continued, now clearly audible from within the chamber. Mitchell could make out fragments of words. Waiting. Below. Return. She radioed dispatch again, requesting immediate backup and noting the unusual light and voice in her report. The dispatcher, Ranger Tom Martinez, responded that a unit was en route but would not arrive for at least 20 minutes due to the distance from the main visitor center. Mitchell decided to secure the area while waiting, positioning herself where she could observe the kiva entrance without approaching too closely. The blue light in the fire pit began to pulse slowly, and the whispering voice grew more coherent, though still speaking in that unusual cadence. Mitchell felt a strange compulsion to enter the kiva, which she resisted with considerable effort. Later, she would describe this feeling as similar to sleepwalking, where part of your mind recognizes what's happening but cannot fully control your actions. The arrival of Rangers Martinez and Jessica Gomez at 7:48 p.m. brought an end to the disturbing phenomena. As they approached the kiva, the blue light extinguished instantly, and the whispering voice ceased. Martinez later reported that he had heard nothing unusual during his approach, though he did note that the air near the kiva felt unusually cold compared to the surrounding area. A thorough inspection of the kiva revealed no explanation for the light or voice Mitchell had experienced. The protective gate showed no signs of forced entry, and the lock mechanism was functioning properly. Martinez documented the incident in the official park log, writing, "Unexplained auditory and visual phenomena reported by Ranger Mitchell. No physical evidence found. Possible atmospheric or geological explanation to be investigated." The 3 rangers completed a comprehensive security sweep of the area, finding no other anomalies or signs of unauthorized access. As they prepared to leave, Mitchell noticed something small and metallic glinting near the sipapu opening in the kiva floor. Upon closer inspection, she discovered what appeared to be a modern silver earring of a design that did not match any known ancestral Pueblo artifacts. The earring was collected as evidence and logged into the park's archaeological inventory. The rangers secured the area and returned to the visitor center, where Mitchell filed a detailed incident report that would later become part of Mesa Verde's Unexplained Phenomena file. The aftermath of the Kiva incident left Mitchell with more questions than answers. The earring was examined by park archaeologists, who determined it to be of modern manufacture, likely produced within the last 20 years. How it came to be inside the restricted kiva remained a mystery, as did the voice and light Mitchell had experienced. The official explanation offered by park administration attributed the phenomena to unusual acoustic properties combined with atmospheric conditions that occasionally occur in the canyon. Privately, several rangers acknowledged that Mitchell's experience was not entirely unprecedented. Over the years, various employees had reported strange sounds and unusual sensations near the cliff dwellings, particularly during the quiet evening hours. Most of these incidents went undocumented for fear of professional repercussions. Mitchell's thorough and professional reporting of her experience, however, brought these unofficial stories into the open. 6 months after the incident, the Park Service installed additional monitoring equipment near the cliff dwellings, including audio recorders and environmental sensors. During the first year of operation, these devices captured several unexplained audio files that contained whispering voices similar to those described by Mitchell, though none were as clear or sustained as her experience. Mitchell remained at Mesa Verde for 3 more years before transferring to a different park. Though she never again experienced anything like the voices in the kiva, the earring discovered that evening remains in the park's evidence collection, its origin and significance still undetermined. No further incidents were reported in that specific kiva after Mitchell's experience. Though rangers still speak in hushed tones about the voices that sometimes echo through the cliff dwellings at dusk. It was mid-July of 2016 in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The summer season brought dense humidity and frequent afternoon thunderstorms to the ancient mountains that straddle the border between Tennessee and North Carolina. Ranger Daniel Torres had been assigned to the Cades Cove district for nearly a decade, developing an intimate knowledge of the area's trails, wildlife, and seasonal patterns. At 36 years old, Torres combined the practical skills of a law enforcement officer with the observational abilities of a naturalist, making him particularly well-suited to patrol the remote sections of the park. His assignment on July 15th was to investigate reports of illegal camping in the backcountry near Spence Field, a high-elevation bald that offered panoramic views of the surrounding mountains. The investigation began unremarkably as Torres checked out from the Cades Cove Ranger Station at 10 a.m., noting the overcast sky and high humidity in the daily log. He drove the winding road to the trailhead, where he would begin the 8-mile hike to Spence Field. The trail was less crowded than usual due to the threatening weather, which Torres found somewhat advantageous for his investigation. As he began his ascent, the forest grew quieter, with the usual sounds of birds and insects muted by the heavy, moisture-laden air. Torres radioed dispatch to confirm his position and intended route, noting that he expected to reach the investigation area by early afternoon. Everything appeared normal for a routine patrol in challenging weather conditions. The first indication of something unusual came approximately 3 miles into Torres's hike, as he approached the Anthony Creek area. The trail, which should have been damp from recent rainfall, showed signs of unusual disturbance in several sections. Torres noted in his field notebook that vegetation alongside the path appeared to have been pressed down in a manner inconsistent with typical foot traffic. More concerning were several broken branches at heights of 6 to 8 feet, suggesting something of considerable size had moved through the area. Torres initially attributed the damage to foraging bears, which were known to frequent the area. But something about the pattern of disturbance didn't quite match typical bear activity. As he continued his ascent, the weather began to deteriorate, with dark clouds gathering overhead and distant thunder rumbling through the valleys. At 12:15 p.m., Torres stopped for a brief rest and to check his GPS unit. While consulting the device, he heard a sound that caught his attention, a heavy footstep in the forest, approximately 50 yards to his left. He called out, identifying himself as a park ranger and asking if anyone needed assistance. There was no response except for the sound of something large moving quickly through the undergrowth. Torres noted the time and location in his logbook, writing, "Possible wildlife encounter. Large animal moving quickly through dense vegetation. Unable to identify species." He proceeded with caution, increasing his awareness of his surroundings as he continued toward Spence Field. By 2:30 p.m., Torres had reached the vicinity of Spence Field, where the reported illegal camping was supposed to have occurred. The high-elevation bald was shrouded in mist, reducing visibility to approximately 100 yards. A light rain had begun to fall, creating a damp, cold environment despite the summer season. Torres located the reported campsite near the edge of the bald, finding it abandoned but recently used. A fire pit contained cold ashes, and several food wrappers indicated the campers had left within the past 24 hours. As Torres documented the site and collected evidence, he became aware of a persistent feeling of being watched. The sensation was strong enough that he radioed dispatch to report his position and the abandoned campsite, subtly mentioning the unusual quiet of the area. At 3:10 p.m., as he was photographing the campsite for evidence, Torres heard a sound that caused him to stop abruptly, a low, guttural vocalization from the tree line approximately 70 yards away. The sound was unlike any wildlife vocalization Torres had encountered in his 10 years at the park. It was deeper than a bear's growl, yet more resonant than a cougar's cry, with a quality that seemed almost deliberate rather than instinctual. Torres immediately called out, identifying himself and ordering whoever was there to show themselves. The only response was the sound of heavy movement through the forest, followed by silence. Torres decided to complete his investigation of the abandoned campsite before attempting to locate the source of the unusual sound. As he collected the remaining evidence, he noticed something that struck him as particularly odd. The campsite showed signs of having been abandoned suddenly, with personal items left behind that most people would not willingly discard. A partially eaten meal sat near the fire pit, and a sleeping bag lay unfurled near a small tent that had been left standing. More disturbing were several large footprints in the soft ground around the campsite, measuring approximately 16 inches in length and showing an unusual pattern of 5 toes with a wide divergent big toe. Torres photographed the prints, noting their size and configuration in his evidence log. At 3:45 p.m., as he was preparing to leave the area, Torres experienced something that would remain with him for years afterward. As he stood near the edge of the bald, scanning the tree line with binoculars, he briefly glimpsed a tall, bipedal figure moving between the trees. The sighting lasted no more than 3 seconds, but it was sufficient for Torres to note several distinctive characteristics. The figure stood at least 7 feet tall, was covered in dark hair or fur, and moved with an unusual bipedal gait that was neither entirely human nor ape-like. Before he could focus his binoculars for a better view, the figure had disappeared into the dense forest. Torres immediately radioed dispatch to report what he had seen. Though he carefully worded his report to emphasize the brief and unclear nature of the sighting, the return journey to the trailhead proved more unsettling than the ascent had been. As Torres descended the mountain, the feeling of being watched intensified. despite his efforts to remain rational and focused. Several times, he heard heavy movement in the forest parallel to his position, though attempts to locate the source proved unsuccessful. At approximately 5:15 p.m., as he approached the Anthony Creek area again, Torres discovered something that brought a cold sense of dread. The trail he had followed upward showed signs of significant disturbance that had not been present on his earlier passage. Large branches were broken along the path, and several sections of trail showed impressions that suggested something heavy had followed him down the mountain. Torres stopped at a small clearing to consult his map and GPS unit, taking the opportunity to scan the surrounding forest carefully. As he stood studying the terrain, he heard a sound directly behind him, the distinct crack of a large branch breaking under weight. He turned quickly to find nothing there, though the sound had been close enough that he should have been able to see whatever caused it. The forest had fallen completely silent, with no bird song or insect noise to mask any potential movement. Torres noted in his logbook, "Pursued or followed by unidentified subject. Large bipedal. Caution advised." He increased his pace, maintaining constant vigilance as he continued toward the trailhead. Torres reached his vehicle at 6:40 p.m., finding it undisturbed. As he loaded his equipment, he conducted a final survey of the surrounding area, noting how the forest seemed to return to its normal state as daylight began to fade. The feeling of being watched had diminished somewhat, though not entirely disappeared. He radioed dispatch one final time to report his safe return to the trailhead, requesting that the incident file be flagged for follow-up investigation. The drive back to the Cades Cove Ranger Station was quiet, with Torres replaying the day's events in his mind, searching for rational explanations that seemed increasingly inadequate. Upon arrival at the station, he completed a detailed incident report, including photographs of the abandoned campsite, the unusual footprints, and the disturbed trail sections. He made sure to document the vocalization he had heard and the brief sighting of the bipedal figure, though he carefully framed these observations in objective, professional language. The following day, Torres and two other rangers returned to Spence Field to conduct a more thorough investigation of the area. They found additional evidence of unusual activity, including more large footprints and several trees with bark stripped at heights of 7 to 8 feet. The abandoned campsite showed further signs of disturbance, with the tent collapsed and additional items scattered around the area. Most disturbing was the discovery of a partially buried backpack containing identification for two hikers who had been reported missing in the park 3 weeks earlier. The backpack showed signs of having been torn open by something of considerable strength, though the contents were largely intact, except for food items, which had been removed. The aftermath of Torres's experience led to one of the most extensive investigations in Great Smoky Mountains National Park's recent history. The missing hiker's backpack discovery prompted a renewed search effort, though no additional evidence or remains were found. The unusual footprints were photographed and cast, though analysis by wildlife biologists proved inconclusive. Some suggested they might be from an unusually large bear with hindfoot deformities, while others noted the toe configuration was more consistent with primate anatomy. The Park Service officially attributed the incidents to unidentified wildlife activity, though privately, several rangers acknowledged the possibility of something more unusual. Torres never publicly speculated about what he had encountered, maintaining his professional focus on the factual evidence he had documented. However, in conversations with trusted colleagues, he acknowledged that the creature he briefly glimpsed moved with an intelligence and deliberation that went beyond typical animal behavior. 5 years after the incident, Torres still patrols the Cades Cove district, though he approaches certain areas of the backcountry with increased caution. The abandoned campsite near Spence Field has since been removed, and the area closed to overnight camping, though no official reason was given beyond resource protection. Rangers who patrol that section of the park occasionally report unusual sounds and fleeting sightings of tall figures in the distance, though most keep these observations to themselves. The mystery of what Torres encountered that July day remains unsolved, a quiet reminder that even in our most visited national parks, there are still places where the unknown holds sway. It was early November of 2019 in Yosemite National Park, California. The autumn season had brought cooler temperatures and fewer visitors to the iconic valley, creating a sense of quiet that contrasted sharply with the busy summer months. Ranger Emily Chen had been with the National Park Service for 5 years, transferring to Yosemite the previous spring. At 31 years old, Chen brought a background in environmental science and a passion for wilderness preservation to her work as a backcountry ranger. Her assignment on November 8th was to conduct a final seasonal check of the high country camps before winter closures. This involved hiking to several remote locations to document site conditions and ensure no equipment or supplies remained that could be damaged by snow or attract wildlife. The day began unremarkably as Chen checked out from the Tuolumne Meadows Ranger Station at 8 a.m., noting the clear skies and cold temperatures in the daily log. Her route would take her along the Pacific Crest Trail to several high-elevation camps, a round trip of approximately 15 miles over rugged terrain. As she began her hike, the crisp mountain air carried the scent of pine and the distant sound of waterfalls, creating the perfect autumn morning in the Sierra Nevada. Chen radioed dispatch to confirm her position and intended route, noting that she expected to complete her patrol by late afternoon. Everything appeared normal for a routine seasonal check. The first anomaly occurred approximately 2 hours into Chen's hike as she approached the Cathedral Lakes area. The trail, which should have offered expansive views of the surrounding granite peaks, was shrouded in an unusual fog that seemed to form without the typical atmospheric conditions. Chen noted in her field notebook that the fog was strangely localized, clinging to the trail while leaving the surrounding landscape relatively clear. More unusual was the quality of the silence that accompanied the fog, not the typical quiet of a high-elevation environment, but an unnatural absence of sound. No birds called, no insects buzzed, and even the wind seemed to be muffled by the strange atmospheric condition. Chen stopped briefly to check her GPS unit, which functioned normally despite the unusual fog. As she stood consulting the device, she became aware of a sensation that was difficult to describe, not quite a sound, but more like a pressure change in her ears, similar to what one might experience when descending rapidly in elevation. The sensation passed quickly, and Chen continued her hike, though with increased awareness of her surroundings. The fog seemed to follow her movement along the trail, maintaining a consistent density and position relative to her location. This was particularly unusual, as fog typically moves with air currents rather than appearing to track with an individual's movement. By 11:30 a.m., Chen had reached the first of her designated checkpoints, a small camping area near Upper Cathedral Lake. The site appeared undisturbed, with no signs of recent use or any equipment left behind. As Chen conducted her inspection, she noticed something that struck her as odd. The surface of the lake, which should have shown gentle ripples from the slight breeze, was perfectly still, almost like glass. More unusual was the reflection in the water, which seemed somehow clearer and more detailed than the actual landscape being reflected. Chen photographed the phenomenon, though she knew the images would likely not capture the strange quality she was observing. As she prepared to leave the area, she heard a sound that caused her to stop abruptly, a single musical note that seemed to emanate from the direction of the lake. The note was clear and sustained, unlike any natural sound Chen had encountered in her years of outdoor experience. It lasted approximately 10 seconds before fading as gradually as it had begun. Chen radioed dispatch to report her position and the unusual sound. though she carefully worded her transmission to maintain a professional tone. The dispatcher acknowledged her report, noting that no other rangers in the area had reported anything unusual. Chen continued her patrol with increased caution, though the fog seemed to dissipate somewhat as she moved away from the lake. The journey to the second checkpoint took Chen through some of the most rugged terrain in the Tuolumne Meadows area. The trail climbed steeply over granite formations that offered spectacular views of the surrounding wilderness. The unusual fog had largely disappeared, though the strange silence persisted in certain areas along the trail. At approximately 1:15 p.m., as Chen was navigating a particularly exposed section of trail near Cathedral Peak, she experienced something that defied logical explanation. The sunlight, which had been bright and clear moments before, suddenly dimmed as if something had passed between her and the sun. Chen looked up expecting to see a cloud, but the sky remained completely clear. The dimming lasted approximately 30 seconds before the light returned to its normal intensity. More disturbing was what Chen observed during those 30 seconds, and the landscape around her appeared subtly altered, with colors shifted toward the blue end of the spectrum and shadows falling in directions that didn't correspond to the sun's actual position. Chen stopped and consulted her GPS unit, which functioned normally and confirmed her correct position on the trail. She noted the phenomenon in her logbook, writing, "Unexplained atmospheric anomaly. Light dimming without apparent cause. Possible visual distortion." She continued her hike, though with a growing sense of unease that she struggled to reconcile with her scientific training and rational mindset. By 3 p.m., Chen had reached the second checkpoint, a remote camping area near the base of Cathedral Peak. The site showed signs of recent use, with a fire pit containing cold ashes and several footprints in the soft soil. As Chen documented the site, she noticed something unusual about the footprints. They showed a pattern of movement that suggested the campers had left in a hurry, with some prints indicating running or rapid movement. More concerning were several items that had been left behind, including a partially eaten meal and a sleeping bag that appeared to have been abandoned suddenly. Chen radioed dispatch to report her findings, requesting that the information be forwarded to the ranger responsible for the area's backcountry permits. As she spoke into her radio, she experienced another unusual phenomenon. Her voice seemed to echo strangely, as if she were speaking in an enclosed space rather than the open mountain environment. The dispatcher acknowledged her transmission, though with a comment about the unusual quality of the audio signal. Chen completed her inspection of the campsite, collecting evidence of the recent use and noting the items that had been abandoned. As she prepared to leave the area, she heard another sound similar to the musical note she had heard near Cathedral Lake, though this time it was lower in pitch and seemed to emanate from the direction of the granite peak above her. The return journey to the Tuolumne Meadows Ranger Station proved increasingly unsettling. As Chen descended the mountain, she experienced several more unexplained phenomena: brief periods of unusual silence, subtle shifts in light quality, and occasional musical notes that seemed to emanate from the surrounding landscape. At approximately 4:30 p.m., as she approached a section of trail known for its expansive views, Chen stopped to photograph the landscape when she noticed something unusual in the distance. Near the edge of a meadow, approximately half a mile away, what appeared to be a group of figures moved in a coordinated pattern that was unlike typical human movement. The figures were too distant to identify clearly, but they seemed to be taller and thinner than typical humans, with an unusual quality of movement that was both graceful and somehow unnatural. Chen raised her binoculars for a better view, but before she could focus on the figures, they had disappeared behind a ridge. She noted the sighting in her logbook, though she carefully framed her observation to emphasize the distance and poor visibility conditions. As she continued her hike, The feeling of being watched intensified, despite her efforts to remain rational and focused. Several times, she heard faint sounds that seemed to follow her movement, though attempts to locate the source proved unsuccessful. Chen increased her pace, maintaining constant vigilance as she continued toward the ranger station. Chen reached the Tuolumne Meadows Ranger Station at 5:45 p.m., finding the facility quiet as most staff had already departed for the day. As she completed her paperwork and prepared her evidence for submission, she reviewed her notes from the day's patrol, struck by how many unusual phenomena she had experienced. The official report she filed documented the abandoned campsite and the evidence of recent use, though she made only brief mention of the atmospheric anomalies and unusual sounds, framing them as possible acoustic and optical phenomena related to unusual atmospheric conditions. The following day, Chen and another ranger returned to the area near Cathedral Peak to conduct a more thorough investigation of the abandoned campsite. They found additional evidence of hurried departure, including personal items scattered around the area and a backpack that had been partially buried under stones. The backpack contained identification for a group of 3 hikers who had been reported missing in the park 2 days earlier. A search of the surrounding area revealed no additional evidence or signs of the missing hikers, though several unusual footprints were discovered that did not match any known hiking boots or wildlife tracks. The prints were unusually long and narrow, with a pattern that suggested bipedal movement, but with a stride length that exceeded typical human capability. The aftermath of Chen's experience led to a quiet investigation within the Park Service, though no official explanation was ever provided for the various phenomena she had documented. The missing hikers were never found, though their case file noted the unusual circumstances of their disappearance and the evidence that suggested they had abandoned their campsite in a hurry. Chen never publicly speculated about what she had encountered during her November patrol, maintaining her professional focus on the factual evidence she had documented. However, in conversations with trusted colleagues, she acknowledged that the combination of atmospheric anomalies, unusual sounds, and the brief sighting of distant figures suggested something beyond typical natural phenomena. 3 years after the incident, Chen still works in Yosemite, though she approaches certain areas of the high country with increased caution. The section of trail near Cathedral Peak, where she observed the distant figures, has become known among rangers as an area of unusual occurrences, though most keep these observations to themselves. The mystery of what Chen experienced that November day remains unsolved, a quiet reminder that even in our most studied and documented landscapes, there are still phenomena that defy explanation. No further evidence of the missing hikers was ever found, and the unusual atmospheric conditions Chen documented have not been officially explained, though some rangers who patrol the area occasionally report similar phenomena when hiking alone in the high country. It was late October of 2012 in Shenandoah National Park, Virginia. The autumn colors were at their peak, painting the Blue Ridge Mountains in brilliant shades of red, orange, and gold. Ranger Michael Harrison had been with the National Park Service for 12 years, spending the last 6 of those at Shenandoah. At 40 years old, Harrison knew the park's trails and seasonal patterns as well as anyone, having patrolled nearly every mile of its 500 miles of trails during his tenure. His assignment on October 28th was to investigate reports of unusual lights near the old Rag Mountain area. The reports had come from several hikers over the past week, describing strange illumination in the sky after sunset and unusual sounds emanating from the mountain's rocky summit. The investigation began unremarkably as Harrison checked out from the park's headquarters at 2:00 p.m., noting the clear skies and mild temperatures in the daily log. He drove to the Old Rag parking area, where he would begin the 4-mile hike to the summit. The trail was busy with leaf peepers taking advantage of the perfect autumn weather, creating a stark contrast to the mysterious reports he was investigating. As Harrison began his ascent, the forest canopy created a cathedral of color overhead, with sunlight filtering through the leaves in shifting patterns. He radioed dispatch to confirm his position and intended route, noting that he expected to reach the summit area by late afternoon. Everything appeared normal for a routine investigation of unusual visitor reports. The first indication that something was amiss came approximately halfway through Harrison's hike, as he approached the more rugged sections of the trail near the rock scramble area. The trail, which should have been busy with hikers enjoying the perfect autumn day, became strangely deserted. Harrison noted in his field notebook that the sudden absence of other visitors was unusual for a weekend day, with such good weather. More concerning were several areas where the trail showed signs of recent disturbance that didn't match typical hiking activity. Branches were broken at heights inconsistent with normal foot traffic, and several rocks along the path appeared to have been moved recently, though not in a way that suggested trail maintenance. Harrison initially attributed these observations to the work of park maintenance crews, though he found it odd that no work orders had been filed for the area. As he continued his ascent, the forest grew quieter, with the usual sounds of birds and other wildlife noticeably absent. At 3:30 p.m., Harrison stopped for a brief rest and to consult his map of the summit area. While studying the terrain features, he heard a sound that caught his attention, a low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the direction of the summit. The sound was unlike any mechanical noise Harrison had encountered in the park, with a quality that seemed almost organic rather than artificial. He noted the time and location in his logbook, writing, "Unidentified auditory phenomenon. Low-frequency hum from summit direction. No apparent source." He proceeded with caution, increasing his awareness of his surroundings as he continued toward the rock scramble area. By 4:45 p.m., Harrison had reached the base of the rock scramble that leads to Old Rag's summit. The area was completely deserted, with no other hikers visible despite the perfect weather and spectacular views. The low hum he had heard earlier was more distinct now, though still difficult to locate precisely. As Harrison began the challenging ascent through the rocky area, he noticed something unusual about the rock formations themselves. Several surfaces appeared to have a strange sheen or quality that reflected light in an unusual manner. He photographed these areas, though he knew the images would likely not capture the subtle effect he was observing. More concerning were several areas where the rock showed signs of recent tool marks, as if something had been cut or removed from the formations. These marks were fresh, with no weathering to suggest they had been there long. Harrison radioed dispatch to report his findings, requesting that the information be forwarded to the park's geological specialist. As he spoke into his radio, the hum seemed to increase in intensity, though it remained difficult to pinpoint its exact location. The dispatcher acknowledged his transmission, though with a comment about unusual interference on the radio frequency. Harrison continued his climb with increased caution, noting that the feeling of being watched had grown stronger as he approached the summit. The final ascent to Old Rag's summit proved more challenging than Harrison had anticipated, not because of the physical difficulty of the rock scramble, but due to the increasing strangeness of the phenomena he was experiencing. The low hum had resolved into what sounded like multiple tones, creating a dissonant chord that seemed to vibrate through the rock itself. More disturbing was the discovery of several areas where the granite appeared to have been cut or removed with precision that suggested advanced tools rather than natural processes. These areas showed clean edges and smooth surfaces that were inconsistent with typical weathering or erosion patterns. At 5:30 p.m., Harrison reached the summit area, finding it completely deserted despite the spectacular views and perfect weather conditions. The panoramic vista should have been filled with other hikers enjoying the sunset. Yet Harrison was alone. As he conducted a systematic survey of the summit area, he discovered something that brought a cold sense of dread, a series of geometric patterns carved into the rock surfaces that were too precise to be natural formations, yet didn't match any known cultural or historical petroglyphs from the region. The patterns were complex, with interlocking lines and curves that created a sense of movement when viewed from different angles. Harrison photographed these formations, noting their precise measurements and orientations in his evidence log. As he worked, he became aware of a subtle change in the light quality, as if the sunset were being filtered through an unusual medium. The most disturbing discovery came as Harrison was examining a large rock formation near the summit's highest point. The surface of the rock appeared to have been cut away to create a flat, polished area approximately 6 feet in diameter. In the center of this area was a series of concentric circles that seemed to pulse with a faint internal light, though the light was too dim to be captured by his camera. As Harrison knelt to examine the formation more closely, he experienced something that would remain with him for years. Afterward, a sudden feeling of vertigo combined with an auditory hallucination of whispers speaking in an unknown language. The sensation lasted only a few seconds, but left him disoriented and deeply unsettled. He stood up quickly, scanning the surrounding area for any sign of other people, though the summit remained deserted. The low hum had increased in intensity, now clearly emanating from the rock formation before him. Harrison radioed dispatch to report his discovery, though he struggled to describe the phenomena in objective, professional terms. The dispatcher acknowledged his transmission, though the radio connection was increasingly affected by interference that seemed to correspond with the intensity of the hum. Harrison decided to complete his documentation of the summit area before beginning his descent, though he maintained a safe distance from the unusual rock formation. The return journey to the trailhead proved more unsettling than the ascent had been. As Harrison descended the mountain, the low hum gradually faded, though the feeling of being watched intensified. Several times, he caught glimpses of movement in his peripheral vision, though attempts to locate the source proved unsuccessful. The rock formations that had appeared unusual on his ascent now seemed to have changed, with the strange sheen or quality he had observed earlier either diminished or absent entirely. At approximately 6:15 p.m., as he was navigating the more technical sections of the rock scramble, Harrison heard a sound directly behind him, the distinct scrape of rock on rock. He turned quickly to find nothing there, though the sound had been close enough that he should have been able to see whatever caused it. The forest had fallen completely silent, with no bird song or wind noise to mask any potential movement. Harrison noted in his logbook, "Possible pursuit or observation by unidentified subject as extreme caution advised." He increased his pace, maintaining constant vigilance as he continued toward the trailhead. The last hour of his hike was completed in near darkness, with Harrison using his headlamp to navigate the increasingly challenging terrain. The feeling of being watched persisted until he reached the more populated sections of the lower trail, where other hikers were beginning their evening hikes. Harrison reached his vehicle at 7:30 p.m., finding it undisturbed. As he loaded his equipment, he conducted a final survey of the surrounding area, noting how the forest seemed to return to its normal state as darkness fell. The low hum had disappeared entirely, though the memory of it remained vivid. He radioed dispatch one final time to report his safe return to the trailhead, requesting that the incident file be flagged for immediate follow-up investigation. The drive back to park headquarters was quiet, with Harrison replaying the day's events in his mind, searching for rational explanations that seemed increasingly inadequate. Upon arrival at headquarters, he completed a detailed incident report, including photographs of the unusual rock formations and geometric patterns. He made sure to document the auditory phenomena and the strange light quality he had observed, though he carefully framed these observations in objective, professional language. The following day, Harrison and several other rangers returned to Old Rag Mountain to conduct a more thorough investigation of the summit area. They found additional evidence of unusual activity, including more geometric patterns and several areas where rock appeared to have been removed with precision cutting tools. The most disturbing discovery was a series of metallic objects buried near the summit objects, made of materials that could not be identified by Park Service geologists or metallurgists. The aftermath of Harrison's investigation led to one of the most unusual internal reviews in Shenandoah National Park's history. The metallic objects discovered near the summit were sent to a specialized laboratory for analysis, though the results were classified and never included in the park's official records. The geometric patterns and rock formations were documented extensively, though public access to certain areas of Old Rag Mountain was quietly restricted under the guise of geological instability. Harrison never publicly speculated about what he had encountered during his October investigation, maintaining his professional focus on the factual evidence he had documented. However, in conversations with trusted colleagues, he acknowledged that the combination of auditory phenomena, unusual light quality, and precision rock modifications suggested something beyond typical natural processes or human activity. 8 years after the incident, Harrison still works at Shenandoah, though he approaches certain areas of the park with increased caution. The summit of Old Rag Mountain remains an area of occasional, unusual reports, though most rangers who patrol the area keep their observations to themselves. The mystery of what Harrison discovered that October day remains officially unsolved. A quiet reminder that even in our oldest and most studied national parks, there are still phenomena that defy conventional explanation. No further evidence of the precision rock modifications or metallic objects has been officially documented, though some rangers who patrol the area occasionally report unusual hums and strange light quality near the summit, particularly during the autumn months. It was early August of 2015 in Glacier National Park, Montana. The summer season had brought warmer temperatures and increased visitor traffic to the rugged wilderness of northern Montana. Ranger Jennifer Walsh had been with the National Park Service for 8 years, transferring to Glacier the previous year. At 34 years old, Walsh brought extensive experience in backcountry search and rescue to her work as a patrol ranger in the park's more remote areas. Her assignment on August 5th was to investigate reports of overdue hikers in the Lone Peak area, a remote section of the park known for its challenging terrain and limited cellular service. The investigation began unremarkably as Walsh checked out from the Many Glacier Ranger Station at 7 a.m., noting the clear skies and cool temperatures in the daily log. 2 hikers, Mark and Susan Thompson, had been reported overdue by their family when they failed to return from a 3-day backpacking trip to the Lone Peak area. Their planned route should have brought them back to the trailhead by August 3rd, 2 days earlier. As Walsh prepared to begin her search, she reviewed the Thompsons' itinerary and experience level, noting that both were experienced backpackers with extensive hiking experience in various national parks. The weather had remained clear throughout their planned trip, suggesting that environmental factors were unlikely to have caused their delay. Walsh radioed dispatch to confirm her position and intended search route, noting that she would begin with the most likely camping areas along the Thompsons' planned route. Everything appeared normal for a search and rescue operation, though Walsh felt a growing sense of concern as she reviewed the details of the case. The first indication that something was unusual came approximately 2 hours into Walsh's search, as she approached the first of the Thompsons' planned camping areas near Lake Helen. The campsite showed signs of recent use, with a fire pit containing cold ashes and several footprints in the soft soil. However, Walsh immediately noticed something odd. The tent that should have been there was missing, along with most of the equipment that would typically be part of a backpacking camp. More concerning were several items that had been left behind, including a partially eaten meal, a water bottle that was still half full, and a hiking boot that appeared to have been removed suddenly. Walsh noted in her field notebook that the campsite showed signs of having been abandoned in a hurry, though without the typical indications of wildlife encounter or medical emergency. As she conducted a more thorough search of the area, she discovered something that brought a cold sense of dread, a series of tracks in the soft soil that did not match any known hiking boots or wildlife tracks. The prints were unusually long and narrow, with a pattern that suggested bipedal movement, but with a stride length that exceeded typical human capability. Walsh photographed the tracks, noting their size and configuration in her evidence log. At 9:30 a.m., she radioed dispatch to report her findings, requesting that additional search teams be deployed to the area. The dispatcher acknowledged her transmission, noting that weather conditions remained favorable for search operations. By 11 a.m., Walsh had expanded her search to include the surrounding area, working in a systematic grid pattern to ensure no potential evidence was missed. The terrain was challenging, with steep slopes and dense vegetation that limited visibility and made movement difficult. As Walsh navigated a particularly dense section of forest near the lake, she discovered something that struck her as particularly unusual: a series of broken branches at heights of 8 to 10 feet, suggesting something of considerable size had moved through the area. The damage pattern was inconsistent with typical bear activity, which usually occurs at lower heights and shows different patterns of branch breakage. More concerning were several large areas where the vegetation appeared to have been pressed down in a circular pattern, as if something heavy had rested or slept there. Walsh noted these locations in her logbook, writing, "Unusual vegetation damage. Possible large bipedal subject. Caution advised." As she continued her search, she found additional evidence of the Thompsons' presence: a small pile of gear that had been left near the trail, including a map, compass, and several food items. The gear appeared to have been abandoned rather than lost, suggesting the Thompsons had left the area intentionally but in a hurry. Walsh radioed dispatch to report her discovery, noting that the evidence increasingly suggested something other than a typical getting lost scenario. The search continued through the early afternoon, with Walsh covering increasingly difficult terrain as she followed what appeared to be tracks left by the Thompsons and whatever had accompanied them. The trail led away from the established path and into a more remote section of the park characterized by dense forest and rocky outcroppings. At approximately 2:15 p.m., Walsh discovered something that would change the direction of the search entirely: a small digital camera lying on the ground near a fallen log. The camera appeared to be in good condition, though the lens was partially obscured by what looked like mud or dirt. Walsh carefully collected the camera as evidence, noting its location in her logbook. The most disturbing discovery came a few minutes later, when Walsh found a piece of fabric torn from what appeared to be the Thompsons' tent. The fabric was caught on a thorn bush approximately 7 feet above the ground, suggesting that something had torn it while passing by. The tear pattern was inconsistent with typical damage from branches or natural obstacles, showing instead a clean cut that suggested deliberate action with considerable force. Walsh radioed dispatch to report her findings, requesting that the search be expanded to include aerial reconnaissance of the area. The dispatcher acknowledged her transmission, noting that a helicopter would be available within the hour, weather permitting. As Walsh continued her search, she entered a section of forest that felt strangely different from the surrounding area. The air seemed unnaturally still, with no bird song or insect noise despite the warm afternoon temperatures. More unusual was a faint, unpleasant odor that she couldn't quite identify, something like damp earth combined with a metallic quality that was unfamiliar. Walsh stopped to consult her map and GPS unit, taking the opportunity to scan the surrounding forest carefully. As she stood studying the terrain, She heard a sound that caused her to stop abruptly, a heavy footstep in the forest, approximately 50 yards to her left. She called out, identifying herself as a park ranger and asking if anyone needed assistance. There was no response except for the sound of something large moving quickly through the undergrowth. Walsh noted the time and location in her logbook, writing, "Possible wildlife encounter. Large animal moving quickly through dense vegetation. Unable to identify species." She proceeded with caution, increasing her awareness of her surroundings as she continued in the direction of the sound. The forest seemed to grow darker as she moved deeper into this unusual area. Despite the fact that the sun was still high in the sky, Walsh felt a growing sense of unease that she struggled to reconcile with her extensive training and experience in backcountry environments. The most significant discovery came at approximately 3:30 p.m., as Walsh was following a game trail that appeared to have been recently used. The trail led to a small clearing where she found something that brought a cold realization: the Thompson's backpack, lying on the ground as if it had been dropped suddenly. The pack had been torn open, with its contents scattered around the clearing. Most of the equipment appeared to be intact, though all food items had been removed. More disturbing were several large footprints in the soft ground around the backpack, measuring approximately 18 inches in length and showing an unusual pattern of 5 toes with a wide, divergent big toe. Walsh photographed the prints, noting their size and configuration in her evidence log. As she collected the scattered items from the backpack, she discovered something that was particularly concerning: a small notebook containing handwritten notes that appeared to document unusual observations during the Thompsons' hike. The final entry, dated August 2nd, read, "Something is following us. Large, not bare. We're trying to lose it in the high country. If you find this, tell our families we love them." Walsh radioed dispatch immediately to report her discovery, requesting that additional search teams be deployed to the area with caution. The dispatcher acknowledged her transmission, noting that the helicopter was en route and would arrive within 15 minutes. The arrival of the search helicopter at 3:50 p.m. brought additional resources and personnel to the operation. As the helicopter conducted aerial reconnaissance of the area, Walsh continued her ground search, following what appeared to be tracks leading away from the clearing. The trail led to a steep, rocky area that would have been challenging for even experienced hikers like the Thompsons. As Walsh navigated this difficult terrain, she discovered additional evidence of struggle: more torn fabric, scuff marks on rocks, and occasional drops of blood that appeared to be human. The most disturbing discovery came at approximately 4:30 p.m., when Walsh found Susan Thompson's hiking boot lying near the edge of a cliff face. The boot appeared to have been removed forcibly, with one of the laces torn. Below the cliff was a dense forest that would have made any recovery operation extremely difficult. Walsh radioed dispatch to report her discovery, noting the GPS coordinates and requesting that the search team focus on the area below the cliff. As she spoke into her radio, she heard a sound that caused her to stop abruptly, a low, guttural vocalization from the forest, approximately 50 yards away. The sound was unlike any wildlife vocalization Walsh had encountered in her 8 years with the Park Service. It was deeper than a bear's growl, yet more resonant than a cougar's cry, with a quality that seemed almost deliberate rather than instinctual. Walsh immediately called out, identifying herself and ordering whoever was there to show themselves. The only response was the sound of heavy movement through the forest, followed by silence. The search operation continued for 5 more days, with additional rangers and search volunteers joining the effort. The area below the cliff face was searched extensively, though no trace of the Thompsons was found. The camera discovered by Walsh was sent to a forensic lab for analysis, though technicians were unable to recover any images from the memory card, which appeared to have been corrupted or deliberately erased. The notebook containing Susan Thompson's final entry was preserved as evidence, though handwriting analysis confirmed it was indeed hers. The unusual footprints photographed by Walsh were examined by wildlife biologists, who found them inconsistent with any known animal species in the region. The official explanation offered by the Park Service attributed the disappearance to unidentified wildlife activity, though privately, several rangers acknowledged the possibility of something more unusual. Walsh never publicly speculated about what had happened to the Thompsons, maintaining her professional focus on the factual evidence she had documented. However, in conversations with trusted colleagues, she acknowledged that the combination of unusual tracks, torn equipment, and Susan Thompson's final note suggested something beyond typical wildlife encounters. 6 years after the disappearance, Walsh still works in Glacier National Park, though she approaches certain areas of the backcountry with increased caution. The section of forest where she found the Thompsons' backpack has become known among rangers as an area of unusual occurrences, though most keep these observations to themselves. The mystery of what happened to Mark and Susan Thompson remains officially unsolved. A quiet reminder that even in our most pristine wilderness areas, there are still places where the unknown holds sway. No further evidence of the missing hikers was ever found, and the unusual footprints documented during the search have never been definitively identified. Though some rangers who patrol the area occasionally report similar tracks and disturbing sounds in the remote sections of the park. It was late March of 2018 in Big Bend National Park, Texas. The spring season brought mild temperatures and blooming desert plants to the vast wilderness of West Texas. Ranger Carlos Mendez had been with the National Park Service for 15 years, spending the last 10 of those at Big Bend. At 43 years old, Mendez knew the park's desert terrain and seasonal patterns as well as anyone, having patrolled nearly every section of its 800,000 acres during his tenure. His assignment on March 22nd was to investigate reports of unusual lights and sounds in the remote Chisos Mountains area. The reports had come from several visitors over the past week, describing strange illumination in the night sky and unexplained sounds emanating from the mountains after dark. The investigation began unremarkably as Mendez checked out from the Panther Junction Visitor Center at 4 p.m., noting the clear skies and warm temperatures in the daily log. He drove to the Chisos Basin area, where he would begin his hike into the mountains. The desert landscape was quiet in the late afternoon light, with the characteristic rock formations of the Chisos Mountains casting long shadows across the valley. As Mendez began his hike, he radioed dispatch to confirm his position and intended route, noting that he expected to reach the investigation area by early evening. Everything appeared normal for a routine investigation of unusual visitor reports. The first indication that something was amiss came approximately 1 hour into Mendez's hike, as he approached the more remote sections of the trail near Emery Peak. The trail, which should have offered expansive views of the surrounding desert landscape, was shrouded in an unusual haze that seemed to form without the typical atmospheric conditions. Mendez noted in his field notebook that the haze was strangely localized, clinging to the trail while leaving the surrounding landscape relatively clear. More unusual was the quality of the light filtering through the haze. It had a subtle greenish tint that created an otherworldly quality to the landscape. Mendez stopped briefly to check his GPS unit, which functioned normally despite the unusual atmospheric conditions. As he stood consulting the device, he became aware of a sensation that was difficult to describe, not quite a sound, but more like a vibration in the air that seemed to correspond with the intensity of the haze. The sensation passed quickly, and Mendez continued his hike, though with increased awareness of his surroundings. The haze seemed to follow his movement along the trail. maintaining a consistent density and position relative to his location. This was particularly unusual, as atmospheric phenomena typically move with air currents rather than appearing to track with an individual's movement. By 6 p.m., Mendez had reached the first of his designated investigation points, a high-elevation overlook near Emery Peak. The area appeared undisturbed, with no signs of recent visitor activity or any evidence that might explain the unusual reports. As Mendez conducted his inspection, he noticed something that struck him as odd. The rock formations in the area showed signs of unusual weathering or erosion that didn't match typical desert processes. Several surfaces appeared to have a strange sheen or quality that reflected light in an unusual manner, almost as if they had been polished or treated with some unknown substance. Mendez photographed these areas, though he knew the images would likely not capture the subtle effect he was observing. More concerning were several areas where the rock appeared to have been cut or removed with precision that suggested advanced tools rather than natural processes. These areas showed clean edges and smooth surfaces that were inconsistent with typical weathering or erosion patterns. Mendez radioed dispatch to report his findings, requesting that the information be forwarded to the park's geological specialist. As he spoke into his radio, the haze seemed to increase in intensity, though it remained difficult to pinpoint its exact source. The dispatcher acknowledged his transmission, though with a comment about unusual interference on the radio frequency. Mendez continued his investigation with increased caution, noting that the feeling of being watched had grown stronger as he moved deeper into the mountains. The journey to the second investigation point took Mendez through some of the most rugged terrain in the Chisos Mountains. The trail climbed steeply over rock formations that offered spectacular views of the surrounding desert landscape. The unusual haze had largely dissipated, though the strange vibration in the air persisted in certain areas along the trail. At approximately 7:15 p.m., as Mendez was navigating a particularly exposed section of trail near the mountain's summit, he experienced something that defied logical explanation. The sunlight, which had been bright and clear moments before, suddenly dimmed as if something had passed between him and the sun. Mendez looked up, expecting to see a cloud, but the sky remained completely clear. The dimming lasted approximately 45 seconds before the light returned to its normal intensity. More disturbing was what Mendez observed during those 45 seconds, and the landscape around him appeared subtly altered, with colors shifted toward the green end of the spectrum and shadows falling in directions that didn't correspond to the sun's actual position. Mendez stopped and consulted his GPS unit, which functioned normally and confirmed his correct position on the trail. He noted the phenomenon in his logbook, writing, "Unexplained atmospheric anomaly. Light dimming without apparent cause. Possible visual distortion." He continued his hike, though with a growing sense of unease that he struggled to reconcile with his scientific training and rational mindset. By 8:30 p.m., Mendez had reached the second investigation point, a remote camping area near the base of a large rock formation known as the Window. The site showed no signs of recent use, with no footprints or other evidence of visitor activity. As Mendez conducted his inspection, he noticed something unusual about the rock formation itself. Several areas appeared to emit a faint glow that was barely visible in the gathering darkness. The glow was too dim to be captured by his camera, though it was clearly visible to the naked eye. More concerning was a series of geometric patterns carved into the rock surfaces that were too precise to be natural formations, yet didn't match any known cultural or historical petroglyphs from the region. The patterns were complex, with interlocking lines and curves that created a sense of movement when viewed from different angles. Mendez photographed these formations, noting their precise measurements and orientations in his evidence log. As he worked, he became aware of a subtle change in the air quality. as if the oxygen content had somehow been altered. He felt slightly breathless despite the moderate physical exertion, though this sensation passed quickly when he moved away from the rock formation. Mendez radioed dispatch to report his discovery, though he struggled to describe the phenomena in objective, professional terms. The dispatcher acknowledged his transmission, though the radio connection was increasingly affected by interference that seemed to correspond with the intensity of the glow from the rock formation. The most disturbing discovery came as Mendez was examining a large section of the rock formation near its base. The surface appeared to have been cut away to create a flat, polished area approximately 8 feet in diameter. In the center of this area was a series of concentric circles that seemed to pulse with a faint internal light, though the light was too dim to be captured by his camera. As Mendez knelt to examine the formation more closely, he experienced something that would remain with him for years afterward, a sudden feeling of disorientation combined with an auditory hallucination of whispers speaking in an unknown language. The sensation lasted only a few seconds, but left him feeling profoundly unsettled. He stood up quickly, scanning the surrounding area for any sign of other people, though the area remained deserted. The faint glow from the rock formation had increased in intensity, now clearly visible even from a distance. Mendez radioed dispatch to report his discovery, though he struggled to describe the phenomena in objective, professional terms. The dispatcher acknowledged his transmission, though the radio connection was increasingly affected by interference that seemed to correspond with the intensity of the glow. Mendez decided to complete his documentation of the area before beginning his descent, though he maintained a safe distance from the unusual rock formation. The return journey to the trailhead proved more unsettling than the ascent had been. As Mendez descended the mountain, the unusual atmospheric phenomena gradually diminished, though the feeling of being watched intensified. Several times, he caught glimpses of movement in his peripheral vision, though attempts to locate the source proved unsuccessful. The rock formations that had appeared unusual on his ascent now seemed to have changed, with the strange sheen or quality he had observed earlier either diminished or absent entirely. At approximately 9:45 p.m., as he was navigating the more technical sections of the trail, Mendez heard a sound directly behind him, the distinct scrape of rock on rock. He turned quickly to find nothing there, though the sound had been close enough that he should have been able to see whatever caused it. The desert night had fallen completely silent, with no nocturnal animal sounds or wind noise to mask any potential movement. Mendez noted in his logbook, "Possible pursuit or observation by unidentified subjects. Extreme caution advised." He increased his pace, maintaining constant vigilance as he continued toward the trailhead. The last hour of his hike was completed in darkness, with Mendez using his headlamp to navigate the increasingly challenging terrain. The feeling of being watched persisted until he reached the more populated sections of the lower trail, where other visitors were beginning their evening stargazing activities. Mendez reached his vehicle at 10:30 p.m., finding it undisturbed. As he loaded his equipment, he conducted a final survey of the surrounding area, noting how the desert seemed to return to its normal state under the starlit sky. The unusual atmospheric phenomena had disappeared entirely, though the memory of them remained vivid. He radioed dispatch one final time to report his safe return to the trailhead, requesting that the incident file be flagged for immediate follow-up investigation. The drive back to the Panther Junction Visitor Center was quiet, with Mendez replaying the day's events in his mind, searching for rational explanations that seemed increasingly inadequate. Upon arrival at the visitor center, he completed a detailed incident report, including photographs of the unusual rock formations and geometric patterns. He made sure to document the atmospheric anomalies and strange light quality he had observed, though he carefully framed these observations in objective, professional language. The following day, Mendez and several other rangers returned to the Chisos Mountains to conduct a more thorough investigation of the area. They found additional evidence of unusual activity, including more geometric patterns and several areas where rock appeared to have been removed with precision-cutting tools. The most disturbing discovery was a series of metallic objects buried near the rock formation objects, made of materials that could not be identified by Park Service geologists or metallurgists. The aftermath of Mendez's investigation led to one of the most unusual internal reviews in Big Bend National Park's history. The metallic objects discovered near the rock formation were sent to a specialized laboratory for analysis, though the results were classified and never included in the park's official records. The geometric patterns and rock formations were documented extensively, though public access to certain areas of the Chisos Mountains was quietly restricted under the guise of geological instability. Mendez never publicly speculated about what he had encountered during his March investigation, maintaining his professional focus on the factual evidence he had documented. However, in conversations with trusted colleagues, he acknowledged that the combination of atmospheric anomalies, unusual light quality, and precision rock modifications suggested something beyond typical natural processes or human activity. 3 years after the incident, Mendez still works at Big Bend, though he approaches certain areas of the park with increased caution. The section of the Chisos Mountains where he conducted his investigation remains an area of occasional, unusual reports, though most rangers who patrol the area keep their observations to themselves. The mystery of what Mendez discovered that March day remains officially unsolved. A quiet reminder that even in our most ancient and unchanged landscapes, there are still phenomena that defy conventional explanation. No further evidence of the precision rock modifications or metallic objects has been officially documented, though some rangers who patrol the area occasionally report unusual atmospheric conditions and strange light quality near the Chisos Mountains, particularly during the spring months. It was early September of 2020 in Voyageurs National Park, Minnesota. The autumn season had brought cooler temperatures and the first hints of fall color to the vast wilderness of northern Minnesota. Ranger David Thompson had been with the National Park Service for 6 years, transferring to Voyageurs the previous year. At 32 years old, Thompson brought a background in wilderness survival and extensive experience with water-based patrol operations to his work in the park's remote lake country. His assignment on September 12th was to investigate reports of unusual silence and missing equipment in the remote Kettle Falls area. The reports had come from several fishing parties over the past week, describing areas where normal wildlife sounds were completely absent and several instances of camping equipment disappearing from secured sites. The investigation began unremarkably as Thompson checked out from the Rainy Lake Visitor Center at 7:30 a.m., noting the overcast skies and cool temperatures in the daily log. He launched his patrol boat from the Visitor Center dock, beginning the long journey across the interconnected lakes that form the heart of Voyageurs National Park. The water was calm, with a light mist rising from the surface in the cool morning air. As Thompson navigated the labyrinth of waterways, he radioed dispatch to confirm his position and intended route, noting that he expected to reach the Kettle Falls area by early afternoon. Everything appeared normal for a routine investigation of unusual visitor reports. The first indication that something was amiss came approximately 2 hours into Thompson's journey. As he entered a section of the park known for its abundant wildlife, the area, which should have been filled with the sounds of birds, small mammals, and other creatures, was unnaturally silent. Thompson noted in his field notebook that the absence of sound was unusual for this time of year, when the forest should be alive with activity preparing for the coming winter. More concerning was the discovery of several fishing camps along the shoreline that appeared to have been abandoned suddenly. The camps showed signs of recent use, with fire pits containing cold ashes and equipment scattered around the sites. However, many essential items were missing: fishing gear, food supplies, and in some cases, even boats that should have been moored nearby. Thompson stopped at one particularly concerning campsite, noting that it appeared to have been abandoned in a hurry, with personal items left behind that most people would not willingly discard. A partially eaten meal sat near the fire pit, and a sleeping bag lay unfurled near a small tent that had been left standing. Thompson radioed dispatch to report his findings, requesting that the information be forwarded to the ranger responsible for the area's backcountry permits. As he spoke into his radio, he experienced an unusual phenomenon. His voice seemed to be absorbed by the surrounding forest rather than carrying across the water as it normally would. The dispatcher acknowledged his transmission, though with a comment about the unusual quality of the audio signal. Thompson continued his journey with increased caution, though the feeling of being watched had grown stronger as he moved deeper into the affected area. By 11:30 a.m., Thompson had reached the vicinity of Kettle Falls, where the most unusual reports had originated. The area was completely deserted, with no other boats visible despite the good fishing conditions and time of year. The silence was even more profound here, with no sounds of wildlife or even the normal lapping of water against the shoreline. As Thompson conducted a systematic survey of the area, he discovered something that brought a cold sense of dread: several boats moored near the falls that appeared to have been abandoned, with fishing gear still on board and engines still running. The boats showed no signs of damage or mechanical failure, yet they sat empty, as if their occupants had simply vanished. Thompson photographed these vessels, noting their positions and conditions in his evidence log. More concerning were several areas along the shoreline where the vegetation appeared to have been pressed down in a circular pattern, as if something heavy had rested or landed there. These areas were too large to be explained by typical wildlife activity, yet they showed no signs of human footprints or other evidence of visitors. Thompson noted these locations in his logbook, writing, "Unusual vegetation disturbance. Possible large unknown subject. Extreme caution advised." As he continued his investigation, he found additional evidence of unusual activity: fishing lines that had been cut rather than tangled, personal items floating in the water near the shoreline, and occasional patches of water that appeared to have an unusual sheen or quality. The most disturbing discovery came at approximately 1 p.m., as Thompson was examining a small island near the falls. The island showed signs of recent camping activity, with a fire pit containing cold ashes and several footprints in the soft soil. However, the camp appeared to have been abandoned suddenly, with equipment scattered around the area and personal items left behind. As Thompson conducted a more thorough search of the island, he discovered something that struck him as particularly unusual: a series of tracks in the soft soil that did not match any known human footwear or wildlife tracks. The prints were unusually long and narrow, with a pattern that suggested bipedal movement but with a stride length that exceeded typical human capability. The tracks led from the campsite to the water's edge, where they simply disappeared, suggesting that whatever made them had either entered the water or been capable of flight. Thompson photographed the tracks, noting their size and configuration in his evidence log. At 1:15 p.m., he radioed dispatch to report his findings, requesting that additional search teams be deployed to the area. The dispatcher acknowledged his transmission, noting that weather conditions remained favorable for search operations. As Thompson spoke into his radio, he heard a sound that caused him to stop abruptly: a low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the direction of the falls. The sound was unlike any mechanical noise Thompson had encountered in the park, with a quality that seemed almost organic rather than artificial. The investigation continued through the early afternoon, with Thompson expanding his search to include the surrounding waterways and shoreline areas. The low hum he had heard earlier seemed to intensify as he moved closer to the falls, though it remained difficult to locate precisely. As Thompson navigated his boat along the shoreline, he discovered several more abandoned campsites, all showing similar patterns of sudden departure and missing essential items. More concerning were several areas where the water appeared to have an unusual quality. It seemed slightly thicker than normal, with a viscosity that was subtly different from typical lake water. Thompson collected samples of this water for later analysis, though he suspected they would not reveal anything unusual when tested in a laboratory. At approximately 2:45 p.m., as Thompson was examining a particularly dense section of forest near the shoreline, he experienced something that would remain with him for years. Afterward, a sudden feeling of vertigo combined with an auditory hallucination of whispers speaking in an unknown language. The sensation lasted only a few seconds, but left him feeling profoundly unsettled. He quickly maneuvered his boat away from the shoreline, scanning the surrounding area for any sign of other people, though the area remained deserted. The low hum had increased in intensity, now clearly emanating from the direction of the falls. Thompson radio dispatched to report his experience, though he struggled to describe the phenomena in objective, professional terms. The dispatcher acknowledged his transmission, though the radio connection was increasingly affected by interference that seemed to correspond with the intensity of the hum. The most significant discovery came at approximately 3:30 p.m., as Thompson was following the shoreline near the base of the falls. The water in this area appeared to have unusual properties, with small whirlpools forming and dissipating in patterns that didn't correspond to the natural flow of water. More disturbing was a series of geometric patterns that appeared on the surface of the water, similar to those created by vibrations, but too complex and organized to be explained by natural phenomena. As Thompson maneuvered his boat to examine these patterns more closely, he discovered something that brought a cold realization: a small digital camera lying on a rock near the water's edge. The camera appeared to be in good condition, though the lens was partially obscured by what looked like a slimy residue. Thompson carefully collected the camera as evidence, noting its location in his logbook. As he worked, he became aware of a subtle change in the light quality, as if the afternoon sun were being filtered through an unusual medium. The shadows seemed to fall in directions that didn't correspond to the sun's actual position, creating a disorienting effect that made navigation difficult. Thompson radio dispatched to report his discovery, noting the GPS coordinates and requesting that additional search teams be deployed to the area with caution. The dispatcher acknowledged his transmission, noting that additional rangers were en route and would arrive within the hour. The arrival of additional rangers at 4:30 p.m. brought more resources and personnel to the operation. As the other rangers began their systematic search of the area, Thompson continued his investigation of the unusual water patterns near the falls. The geometric patterns on the water's surface had become more complex and organized, forming shapes that appeared almost deliberate in their construction. More disturbing were several areas where the water seemed to separate, revealing what appeared to be metallic objects beneath the surface. These objects were too deep to retrieve with the equipment available, though they appeared to be too regular in shape to be natural formations. Thompson documented these observations with photographs and detailed notes, though he struggled to find adequate scientific explanations for what he was observing. As the afternoon progressed toward evening, the unusual phenomena began to intensify. The low hum became more distinct. The geometric patterns on the water became more complex, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Several of the rangers reported experiencing unusual physical sensations, including brief periods of disorientation and auditory hallucinations similar to what Thompson had described earlier. At 6:15 p.m., as the rangers were preparing to conclude their search for the day, they experienced something that would change the direction of the investigation entirely. A sudden, intense flash of light emanating from the direction of the falls, followed by a period of complete silence that lasted approximately 5 minutes. When normal sound gradually returned, the unusual phenomena had disappeared entirely, as if they had never occurred. The aftermath of the Kettle Falls incident led to one of the most extensive investigations in Voyageurs National Park's history. The camera discovered by Thompson was sent to a forensic lab for analysis, though technicians were unable to recover any images from the memory card, which appeared to have been corrupted or deliberately erased. The water samples collected by Thompson showed no unusual chemical or biological properties when tested in a laboratory, though several technicians noted that the samples seemed to retain a slight viscosity that was difficult to explain scientifically. The unusual tracks photographed by Thompson were examined by wildlife biologists, who found them inconsistent with any known animal species in the region. The official explanation offered by the Park Service attributed the various phenomena to unusual atmospheric and hydrological conditions, though privately, several rangers acknowledged the possibility of something more unusual. Thompson never publicly speculated about what he had encountered during his September investigation, maintaining his professional focus on the factual evidence he had documented. However, in conversations with trusted colleagues, he acknowledged that the combination of unusual silence, missing equipment, and unexplained phenomena suggested something beyond typical natural processes or human activity. 2 years after the incident, Thompson still works at Voyageurs, though he approaches certain areas of the park with increased caution. The Kettle Falls area remains an area of occasional unusual reports, though most rangers who patrol the area keep their observations to themselves. The mystery of what happened at Kettle Falls that September day remains officially unsolved, a quiet reminder that even in our most pristine water-based wilderness areas, there are still phenomena that defy conventional explanation. No further evidence of the unusual tracks or metallic objects beneath the water has been officially documented, though some rangers who patrol the area occasionally report unusual silence and strange water patterns near the falls, particularly during the autumn months. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable. Across our national parks, from the highest mountains to the deepest forests, from the driest deserts to the most expansive waterways, there are still phenomena that defy explanation. The rangers who patrol these wild spaces are trained observers, skilled in documentation and investigation. Yet even they encounter experiences that challenge our understanding of the natural world. The 8 cases we've explored tonight span different regions, different seasons, and different circumstances, yet they share common threads of the unexplained. These are not stories told for entertainment or exaggeration. They are documented incidents that have left experienced professionals questioning what they thought they knew about the wilderness they call their office. In the silence that follows these encounters, there are more questions than answers. What stalks the backcountry of our national parks? What causes the unusual atmospheric conditions, the strange sounds, and the disturbing phenomena that rangers occasionally document? Science provides explanations for many things, but some experiences remain outside the boundaries of current understanding. The files we've accessed through official channels, personal interviews, and archived reports suggest that there are still mysteries in our wilderness that resist categorization and explanation. These are not the sensational stories of popular media, but quiet encounters documented by trained observers who have nothing to gain and everything to lose by reporting unusual phenomena. The pattern that emerges from these cases is both fascinating and unsettling. Across different parks and different decades, rangers have reported similar phenomena. Unusual silence in areas that should be filled with wildlife sounds, strange atmospheric conditions that don't match typical weather patterns. encounters with beings that don't correspond to known wildlife species, and disturbing evidence that suggests something intelligent and purposeful moves through our wilderness areas. Perhaps most troubling is the number of experienced outdoors people who have disappeared under mysterious circumstances in these areas, leaving behind only puzzling evidence and unanswered questions. The national park system was established to preserve America's wild spaces for future generations. Yet even as we study and document these areas, they retain secrets that defy our understanding. The rangers who patrol these boundaries between civilization and wilderness serve as our eyes and ears in these remote places, occasionally bringing back reports that challenge our assumptions about what is possible in the natural world. These reports are often quietly filed away, discussed only in hushed tones among those who have had similar experiences, creating an unofficial body of evidence that suggests our wilderness holds mysteries we have yet to comprehend. What we do know is that these encounters are not new. Native American legends and early explorer accounts contain stories of strange beings and unexplained phenomena in many of the same areas where modern rangers have their unusual experiences. The difference today is that we have trained observers equipped with documentation tools and scientific methodology. Yet, even these resources often fail to provide adequate explanations for what is encountered. The cases we've explored tonight represent only a fraction of the unusual incidents documented in our national parks over the years. Many more go unreported due to fear of professional repercussions or personal skepticism. The rangers who shared these experiences did so because they believe in the importance of accurate documentation, even when the documentation defies easy explanation. They represent the best of our National Park Service dedicated professionals committed to truth and observation, even when that truth challenges our understanding of the world around us. In the quiet moments after these encounters, when the documentation is complete and the official reports filed, there remains a sense of something larger and more complex than our current knowledge can encompass. The wilderness has always held a special place in the American imagination, a place of both beauty and danger, of wonder and mystery. Our national parks represent some of the last truly wild spaces in our country, areas where the natural world still operates largely on its own terms. Perhaps it's not surprising that these areas occasionally manifest phenomena that we don't yet understand. The rangers who patrol these spaces are modern-day explorers, venturing into areas where few others go and occasionally bringing back reports that expand the boundaries of our knowledge. What we've learned from these cases is that there are still frontiers to be explored, even in our most visited and studied landscapes. The unknown is not always in distant galaxies or deep oceans. Sometimes it's just beyond the trailhead. In the areas where few venture and where the normal rules of civilization give way to something older and more mysterious. These encounters remind us that despite our technological advances and scientific understanding, there are still aspects of the natural world that operate beyond our current comprehension. The wilderness keeps its secrets, occasionally revealing just enough to remind us how much we still have to learn. If you or someone you know has a true story to share, leave it in the comments below. The documentation of these experiences helps create a more complete picture of what occurs in our wild spaces. And your story might provide the missing piece of someone else's puzzle. The rangers who shared these experiences did so because they believe in the importance of accurate observation and documentation, even when the observations challenge our understanding of what is possible. By sharing these stories, we honor their commitment to truth and expand our collective knowledge of the mysteries that still exist in the wilderness areas we hold dear. The files of our national parks contain many more stories like these, waiting to be discovered and shared. Each one adds to our understanding of the complex and sometimes inexplicable phenomena that occur in the wild spaces of America. These stories deserve to be told, not for sensationalism, but as part of the ongoing human endeavor to comprehend the world around us in all its complexity and mystery. The boundary between the known and unknown is not always clearly marked, especially in the wilderness areas of our national parks. The rangers who patrol these boundaries occasionally cross into territory that challenges our understanding of the natural world, bringing back reports that remind us how much we still have to learn. These encounters are not about fear or entertainment, but about documentation and the quiet acknowledgement that there are still mysteries in our world that defy easy explanation. The cases we've explored tonight represent only a small sample of the unusual phenomena documented in our national parks over the years. They remind us that even in our most studied and visited landscapes, there are still places where the unknown holds sway. The wilderness keeps its secrets, occasionally revealing just enough to remind us of how much we still have to learn about the world around us. In the quiet moments after these encounters, when the documentation is complete and the official reports filed, there remains a sense of something larger and more complex than our current knowledge can encompass. These are the moments that define the boundary between what we know and what we have yet to discover. Thank you for watching Snowbound Screams. Until next time, stay safe out there.